think every person is a performer to some extent, not even just artists, not just actors, not just, singers, mimes, dancers, whatever. Like I feel like we're all performing, and I want to explore that in today's video. Even when I turn on the camera, I'm like, oh, am I performing? Like, how do I change? I think it's like my goal to change as little as possible when I start rolling the camera, but to some extent, I'm aware that I'm performing in some way because I'm aware of a camera. I'm aware that people may or may not be watching this. So far, not. Unless this is the one. Maybe this is the video. Maybe this is the one, guys. But we don't call it performance. We call it normal, actually. We call it upholding the status quo. Because our identities, our self-perception, the personalities we foster is the most consistent performance we've ever created in our entire life. It's consistent enough to where we've actually believed a lot of it, and we've got other people believing a lot of it too. Being human is performative. Being human is performative. Surviving to some extent is performative, and art makes it visible. For actors, artists, directors, musicians, like, this is very layered, because the job is to express themselves or express as others or express about others. So while the job is to kind of empathize and feel into what someone else might need, it's also your highest calling to become more yourself. So it can feel like a paradox there. And so the question I want to kind of bring forward is like, what happens when those things blur, And it's not to accuse or judge at all. It's just a conversation around what happens when those intentions, your initial good intentions, your pursuit, just becomes another version of yourself that you're performing. Can you get so far away from yourself that you lose who you were? Today's world, right, the content world, it kind of requires this constant expression of identity. Most of this is through personal branding and bios and videos and pictures and videos about pictures and captions about bios. And I do wonder sometimes, just based on my own foray into the content space, like how much of that is performative and how much of that is clear and authentically aligned with a unique perspective. If we're hopping on a trend, we're just performing authenticity or performing evolution. Can we evolve if we're just streaming our own evolution? I wonder, because art to me is like this messy, fragmented process, and I'm trying to streamline it here on the channel, but I just think it's very interesting when people are sharing about, their healing journey, for instance, and it's highly aesthetic. And I'm just wondering, like, how the fuck, what? Look how healed I am, and look how aesthetic I'm being. This is not a judgment, this is not accusatory, it's just genuine curiosity. Can we perform the idea of being in touch with our emotions without actually being in touch with our emotions? Is the self something that you are or something that you curate? I like to think I know the answer to that, but I'm curious how others feel. And as an actor, right, you learn that you can cry on command. You learn that others can cry on command. And in your own process, you can see that because the art form of performance is intentionally meant to portray human behavior, you try to get as close as you possibly can to the truth, but it doesn't always mean that you felt truthful on that take or on that night, or in that moment. Performance is an embodied deception of self as well, but a bit more precise. Yeah. Is it possible that we as human beings can live as a character of a life? Is it possible that we as human beings can start to adopt traits of a character who is not us and carry on playing that role without even knowing it, I wonder? Is it possible that a human being would unknowingly adopt expectations or conditioning or characteristics or traits or behaviors or even intentions that weren't theirs to begin with? Is it possible that they've done this without even knowing, or do they do it knowingly? I think that there's definitely this aspect of insecurity that can exist inside of an individual that thinks this part of me is not worthy enough to show to the world, so I have to create a performance to shroud that and, create a different perception so that I'll be more accepted, or, you know, deflect a perception from something that I feel bad about, some kind of mistake that you made. You know, mistakes happen, they happen. So that's why I wonder, right? This highly aesthetic performance of clarity and humanity can sometimes be so convoluted inside of worrying about details and worrying about perception. And I wonder how much of that aesthetic emphasis actually hinders the flow of regular everyday life, because you can project whatever you want into the world, right? Or someone else can project whatever they want onto you. But at the end of the day, there is this, I think, terminal feeling inside of each of us that, although I think that there's a tendency to believe that we are terminally unique, I think that we are all so much similar than we think to one another. And it's interesting how we try to hide that from each other, not seeing that if we just shared those parts of ourselves with one another, we would have no choice but to create a connection. That's the interesting paradox about all this. And there is a trope that, you know, the tortured genius, the tortured artist, for many years, and I think still to some extent, there's an idea that in order to be a more high functioning creative or an eccentric artist, that you have to be like deeply tortured, as if creativity was something that you can only really access, or you can access a higher plane of creativity if you're behaving with more instability. And that's an interesting part of humanity, building people up just to indulge in the ego-centric mindset of watching them be torn down as well. You kind of see that people who are spiraling or people who are down and out are actually not hyper focused on, but instead they are kind of discarded and left to the side. They're kind of forgotten about. It's just an interesting observation that there is this aspect of self that an individual likes to kind of indulge into, that lower negative vibration, in order to kind of justify their experience in the world, right? And make us feel like we're a part of the world in some way, or placing ourselves as a morally superior person or soul or something, if we are able to, like, you know, throw a stone at, you know, the person on TV or the song you don't like, you know. I kind of feel like the artist of this century is quietly creating, quietly powerful, deeply curious, almost like philosophical in nature, grounded in their own chaos. They ask better questions than they give answers for. They're not flailing for attention either. They're just cultivating more awareness, more intention, more attention to intention. They don't need to be kind of known for their dysfunction. They would rather be respected for their insights, their awarenesses, their creativity, their creations, even if it takes, you know, a longer time to gain that audience, or, you know, make that money, or whatever it is that you know, you set out to do. Even if it's going to take a little bit more time to heal yourself in order to create that project, in order to bring it into the world. Maybe life is still informing this work, but the artist of today would rather sit in their own knowing, tinker around the shop, and just become the best version of themselves that they possibly can, knowing that once they reach that place, that they'll become undeniable. You know, that's the artist of today. Of course, there's this race for attention. There's this need for attention that I don't think is going anywhere. I mean, I'm not judging it either. I'm sitting here on YouTube needing attention. I'm just describing these aspects of humanity and what I'm observing in the world and in myself. It's interesting. And if I can explain a little bit more about what I mean by that, I kind of feel like in theater, the performance is live. It's like very immediate. It's in the room. The audience and the actors on stage are all feeding off of each other. There's an exchange happening in real time, energetic exchange. And in filmmaking, the performance is captured, then edited. I feel like that's what the new artist is kind of doing. They're not sharing bird's eye curated photos of their breakfast. They are sharing revelations that they are discovering and making throughout their process in real time. It's a bit reactive, but it's more of a processed reaction. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that intention colors the future, right? Because all these videos will live online, and I wonder if they'll go viral now or they'll go viral in 30 years, you know? But there's a movement happening. There's definitely a movement happening. The artist of today, the philosopher of today is like collecting and shaping and sculpting identity, authentic identity, and directing it, like sharing it. Yeah, sharing it like a director in the edit bay in post-production of a film. I don't think the artist of today is begging to be consumed. I think they are creating works that beg to be returned to time and time again. Timeless art, timeless insights, mirroring humanity and life and experience and trauma and healing and joy and pain. So I do wonder, right, how much of our own identity is performed. How can we even know? I don't remember everything I've ever learned. You just know stuff now. You just do stuff now. You just behave certain ways now. You just create a certain way now. You just speak a certain way now. You move a certain way now. You live in a certain place now. You know, you wear what you want to wear now. You have the friends you want to have now. You know, you're like, am I in the scene right now or am I directing it? Am I, you know, like what would happen if we just stopped explaining ourselves and just created something? Anything, you know? And if performing for survival is a part of being human, then it's not a bad thing to perform, and we wouldn't want to stop performing then either, right? I think the goal is to figure out what our authenticity is and then perform that, right? How can we ground this performance, right? Like an actor, like a great actor. How can we ground this performance in truth, in truth? Sandy Meisner. If acting is just living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, then living is just living truthfully, because acting is mirroring human behavior, human life, human experience, human story. So you're the casting director too. Choose the role that you want. Choose the role that aligns with your values. Cast yourself in the movie of your day in the same way that you cast the film, you know? And if you tell me that you're not the type of person that wouldn't cast yourself as the hero, come on. I get that, but I encourage you to cast yourself as the hero of this movie, of your day, of your life. And that's not selfish. That doesn't mean you're selfish. It just means that you're on your journey, right? If you look at life through the former, which is positive, that everything is happening for us, then you would naturally be the hero of the movie of your life. But I digress. Let's not ask ourselves, how do I look when I'm doing this? Let's ask ourselves, how do I feel when I'm connected to this? Because any role that you choose in your life with awareness is honest. It's honest. Even if later more information is presented and you change your goals or your, you know, the things that you prioritize, it was still honest for you in the moment. There's no reason to regret. If you cast yourself as the supporting role, that's okay, that's honest. But now is an opportunity to kind of shift that perspective. You know, you were the supporting character in the movie that the audience loved so much that now you get your own trilogy. Congratulations. What are you going to do with it? Who are you going to be? What was the origin story for this character? And how can the world now fall more in love with you and your art and who you are and who you've been and what you've gone through because of how you express and who you are and who you've become and who you remained throughout all of it? And what kind of world would we build if we didn't feel like we needed to perform a false sense of security or a false sense of confidence or self-worth? Like, if identity wasn't so formulaic, but more of like an open-ended film treatment, what would those friendships look like if they weren't performing interests that they have in common? Ooh, that's interesting. I wonder what education would look like if people weren't pressured to achieve at such a high level, because your grades are a performance. That's how I know I wasn't performing. But then maybe that was fear, right? Maybe that was fear. My indifference around that might have just been my fear. I just made a video on indifference. Check that out. What would healing look like if it was never performed online? Would people be healing in their own lives if it wasn't performed online? Because I think a lot of online information trickles into people's lives and allows them to learn things and then apply it to their own life. You know, hopefully that's what my videos do to some extent for your own creative process or your own just life process and unfoldment. Performing this confidence can inspire others to feel confident. You hear about the singer who was terrified before their most incredible performance that inspired the world. What if those social systems were built on more depth and more connection and more compassion and understanding instead of optics and clout? What if art was taught like more of a self-inquiry instead of a career path? Like, would it be different? Like, what if your only requirement as an artist was to return to yourself daily and express what you wanted? Maybe that version of you that doesn't like need to be understood is the part that is ready to be known. Maybe performance is not a performance at all. Maybe it's a reclamation. Maybe it's a deeper remembering of our inherent nature, who we came here to be as just humans in the world. So maybe we should give ourselves that gift and curiously asking ourselves inwardly and waiting in the silence for the answer around the question, who am I when I'm not performing? Who are you when you're not performing? Who are you when you're not performing? What versions of yourself are you still performing? And is it case by case? Like, I imagine that we all adopt similar traits and archetypes in order to just be different for other people. You know, Easter was recently, and I was talking to a family member on the phone, and my other family member was like, don't swear in front of so-and-so. And I was like, oh, my bad. I forgot that in that moment I was supposed to be performing as if I was someone who actually gave a fuck about that type of thing. What would it feel like to just allow yourself to become, without an audience, be that artist, hybrid, philosopher that you are, you know, and where your content just documents your evolution. It's not curated or aesthetically supposed to be something that it's not. It just is what it actually is. And I encourage you to apply that to your art as well. You know, you're not performing your growth, because then your performance and your identity becomes this prison, this chamber that you've built in order to please or abstain a certain perception, a certain relationship, a certain career, whatever it is. You don't want that performance to become so much of a prison that you can't escape it. You want that performance to be grounded in authenticity and truth, just like your favorite actor. You want truth. And others want truth too, and that's the paradox here, is that if we can figure out our authenticity and stop performing our humanity, then I wonder what type of expression would just automatically come into the world. I wonder how that would inform or support your life, and how much that would support the energy that's in alignment with you to come in. If we're performing a false sense of self, then we're literally projecting the image into the world that this is who we are not. So how can we receive that which we are, you know? And I don't think we can. I think we have to really, really ground into that. My encouragement for you is to just be so yourself. Be so yourself. Be so goofy. Who were you when you were a kid, right? Come back to that. Why'd you start? And I know that it's scary. There are so many different reasons why we have to why we feel like we have to perform, that it's not as easy to just say, this is why you shouldn't perform, you know, a false sense of who you are, because it's so much more convoluted than that. So much more kind of, it's harder than that. And there can be outside influences that are, you know, keeping you in that place. So just be really gentle with yourself while you're unpacking this new awareness, if this message resonates for you. just also want to encourage you that even though it could be confronting, there will only be more beauty on the other side of that authentic expression. It's Erykah Badu, I remember this clip. She says,
kind of get to it when you become it, because I'm finding out that the universe really doesn't give you what you ask for. It gives you what you are. And you attract the things that you are. So yeah, you can't really race to be something you're not.
so we have to come into alignment with who we want to be before we can receive that which we are. All right, I'll leave you with that. I hope that there was something interesting in this video for you, and I hope to see you in the next one.